Yeah. Oh, I can take them out. Lots of room up front. Come on in. Good morning. It is fabulous to see so many friends and to be able to wave and say hi. I miss seeing many of you. For those who I haven't had the pleasure to meet, my name is Shannon Archibek Engel. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I serve you all at Colorado State University through the Vice President for Diversity Office as an Assistant Vice President for Assessment and Strategic Initiatives. If you want to know what that means, besides that we love long titles at CSU, just grab me later and we'll get through it. I want to welcome you all to the College of Agricultural Sciences Come to the Table event. I'm very excited about today. We will intentionally invest together in a critical conversation about supporting an inclusive and equitable College of Agricultural Sciences. This is a passion for many folks in this room, and it's a great day to begin the conversation. Our dialogue will be richer because you are here, and for that, I am sincerely grateful. To begin, please join me in welcoming Jan Iron to the stage for our land acknowledgement.
Yad Bennett Arnold Crochet, Jan Irony in the Shia. Kit the cheating in the Schlinto, Katlini Bashes Chin, Trachitni Dash Chado, Trachitni Dash Nale, Ot as the nest sun Schle, Yad Hehe. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to spring semester 2020. I just greeted you in my first language, which is Dene, or Navajo. We're taught this formal way of introduction at a young age so that we may establish a kinship, a relationship with everyone and everything around us. This helps us to establish our place in the world and recognize how our being has a purpose and can make a difference. My name is Jan Iron, and I am an IT professional in the Agricultural Experiment Station. I'm very honored to share Colorado State University's Land Acknowledgement Statement with you today. The purpose of this statement is to show respect for the indigenous peoples and to recognize their enduring relationship to and respect for the land and everything within and upon it. Practicing acknowledgement can also bring an awareness and understanding about peoples and histories that are often suppressed or forgotten. As we come to the table today to continue building an equitable and inclusive college together, we must continue our journey of healing and reconciliation with all nations, with Mother Earth, and all our Creator's blessings. We must also recognize that we are the new stewards of this land and take that responsibility seriously. Our future generations, you are depending on it. Colorado State University acknowledges with respect that the land we are on today is the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Hinanana, the Arapaho, Sisistus, Cheyenne, and the Nooch, Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other native tribes. We recognize the indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. CSU is founded as a land-grant institution, and we accept that our mission must encompass access to education and inclusion, and significantly that our founding came at a dire cost to Native nations and peoples whose land this university was built upon. This acknowledgement is the education and inclusion we must practice in recognizing our institutional history, responsibility, and commitment. Thank you.
to let you know about a few resources that you may need access to. Hopefully you found the elevators that are across this entryway here on the way in this morning. If not, one is that is dislocated beyond the registration table. Gendered and gender-neutral restrooms are located along the main hallway on this main floor of the Student Center. There's also a lactation room and a meditation room located on this floor. If there are other resources that are needed today, please do not hesitate to ask me or any of the Diversity Catalyst team or any of the organizing committee who will be standing up here in just a second. Folks at the registration table are also a good resource. An event like this one is a true collaboration, and we would like to extend a sincere thank you to the folks who helped make this happen. I'd like to recognize the entire College of Agricultural Sciences and Dr. James Pritchett in particular for the courage and the persistence to make this day happen. It takes a lot in a leader to have a day like this happen. I want to say thanks to the Office of the Vice President for Diversity, which is where I work. So those are folks who behind the scenes make lots of stuff happen that others don't get to see. So I want to say thanks to those. If the organizing committee is able and willing, I would like you to stand. If you sat in the room and decided what was going on, that's you. Please join me in saying thanks. Elias Quinones, soon to be Dr. Elias Quinones, I would like to thank you and the Ag Ambassadors who are here today to help us get through the day. Thank you. Diversity Catalyst team, will you please stand if you're willing and able? Please acknowledge these folks and the tireless work that they do and the commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion in the college. Please also know that these are folks that you can reach out to during the day if you have questions about things and programs, activities, speakers that are happening today and throughout the semester and into the future. I also want to say thanks to the Division of Student Affairs and particularly to SEED, which is the group that will be, the undergraduate group, which will be leading some of the conversation with undergraduate students this afternoon. So thank you to them. You may have noticed that some people have their pronouns listed on their name tags. I do. We will try to model inclusive practices throughout the day, and this is one of those practices. We welcome folks to add their own pronouns, such as she, her, hers, he, him, his, they, them, their, etc., as a sign of respect for people and for all genders. This afternoon's session with Flo King will be an opportunity to learn more if you'd like to know more about pronouns. You may have also noticed copies of the community guidelines in the Colorado State University Principles of a Community at your table. This should be the top sheet at your table. It is important that we work to make the implicit explicit today as we enter into dialogue. That's true of most deep conversations. Today we're going to try to interrogate some of our assumptions and what do we expect of those in our community so that we can engage in an authentic way. So their community guidelines will help guide us through those. Our community guidelines help us to understand and engage with each other to support both learning and growth. Also an important note that when actively engaging in conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we all make mistakes. I want to say that again. When engaging in authentic conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we all make mistakes. I will make mistakes. I will make mistakes today. I've been doing this work for approximately 30 years. And some days I feel like I might know a little bit. So if you're newer to the conversation, recognize that you're going to make mistakes, and that is okay. Mistakes will help us learn and they will help us grow. I encourage you to lean into your courage and take some risks. Ask some questions that you're not sure about. Ask the hard questions that you've pondered. Those will help us to make progress. Our goal today is progress, not perfection. Please engage that way. It is now an honor a true honor for me to welcome to the stage one of my mentors, someone that I've known, I think I was trying to count, it's over a couple decades. Yeah, it's been a minute. And someone who has helped guide me and helped me learn about a lot of things, including I was thinking on the way in today about the word subsidize and the way those in social sciences use the word subsidize and the way that economists use the way subsidize. And if you don't know, they don't mean the same thing. I think that's an example of the conversations that I hope we have today, because sometimes we say something, but we don't have this attach the same meaning to the words that we're using. So with that, please welcome Interim Dean James Pritchett.
Well, Shannon, thank you. As many of you know, I'm an ag economist by training and interim dean by opportunity. And I can't imagine a better opportunity than to be with you today to learn alongside you, to be able to build some bridges and to welcome folks to the table, which is what we would like to do, is to understand and really affirm the commitment that we all share. That's why you're here today, of welcoming folks to the table. I want to recognize Dr. Shannon Archibek-Engel. She didn't thank herself while she was up here, so would you join me in thanking Shannon? Dr. Archibek-Engel is tireless in working along some of us who need a little bit more when we need guidance and counsel. And one of the things that Shannon taught me is about how there can be a situation, how there can be a moment in time, and two narratives exist, or maybe more narratives, about what happens in that moment. And I think that's true within the College of Agricultural Sciences. So first, let me do this. Let me acknowledge something that's true. This college is committed to inclusive excellence, meaning that we want everybody to feel welcomed, that we want everybody to have a seat at the table, that we want everybody to feel as if they're affirmed, that they're valued, and they're respected. Those are core values as part of what we are, and it's part of the reason why we're here today. And let's acknowledge that narrative is true. At the same time, we acknowledge that not everybody feels like that all the time. I see some heads nodding right now. That's true, isn't it? We know it around us. We see evidence of it with us, too. We see evidence that we want to be welcoming. We've done it this week, right? You've shaken somebody's hand, you've given them a smile, you've seen some wayward, lost people trying to find room 130 in the Animal Sciences building, and you've pointed them in the right direction, haven't you? Maybe you bought them lunch. You were downstairs in Spoons, and you saw that clam chowder. You had somebody who was next to you, said, hey, I want to welcome that person in. I'm going to offer to buy him something. We work toward that. Our Diversity Catalyst team does that as they think about welcoming, as they think about all the ways, little and small, that we might be able to assist and be resources for others. And they nudge and they prod, and they do that in their departments who are integrating that into their strategic plans. And it actually makes its way all the way up to the leadership of our college, where we're firmly committed to that. That's one of those narratives. And there's another narrative, too, that at times, some folks don't feel like they're part of the community. And when you think about all the various identities that exist for us, whether that be about our backgrounds, where we come from, how experienced we are in agriculture, whether or not this is we're the first in our family to come to Colorado State University, those differences sometimes mean that you don't feel like you're in the right place. And we want to be able to build a table that we can welcome folks to, so that even when you feel like that, there's somebody welcoming you to join and to belong. We want to come to the table. We want you to come to the table. We want you to come with your passion, with your creativity, with your ideas, with your lived experiences, because we know we're all stronger when we can build on that foundation ourselves. I'd mentioned that sometimes there's a narrative, sometimes there's a feeling that you don't belong. And we have some evidence of that that's come to us just during this last year. You know of events that have happened in our larger community that reflect that. But we also have it in a very systematic way. If you take a look at the 2018 climate survey that we performed at Colorado State University, there's some specific reference in the College of Agricultural Sciences to ways that maybe that gap exists. So if you go to the Vice President Diversity website, you can pull that down yourselves. This is something that we've been sharing throughout the college and will continue to do during this next year. This led us to think, we really have to understand the lived experience of the college a bit better. So let's ask for help. Let's hire some experts, folks like Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler, who's going to speak to us in a moment, and Carolyn Turner, who completed a report. I've got a copy of this report with me right now that had to do with a set of interviews of lived experiences of our staff, of our faculty, and our students in the College of Agricultural Sciences. Some of the things are terrific about the commitment that we have, the values that we share, the things that we want to have happen. And at the same time, there's a narrative that says, I want to be able to help, but I don't know how to do it. I recognize that there are people around us that see differences, and there's a tension that exists, and we want to work on that together. So maybe that's what today is really about, is finding that commitment ourselves and being able to work together. This report is available to you if you go to the same site you registered for this conference. If you scroll down to the bottom, there's a link to this very document. And we'll have some readout sessions along with further dialogue the rest of the semester about what we can do together to make sure that people feel welcomed at the table and they join us at the table. Hey, I'm excited about this. We're going to have a great day today. We're going to have folks that'll help us, that'll lead us forward, folks that'll be able to give us tools that'll be in our toolkit. Let's commit to that today, right? We don't have to solve everything today in this moment. But what we can do is say, I'm going to look across the table from somebody today and I'm going to build trust with that person. I'm going to have empathy today as we have some important conversations. I'm going to come to the table with my own identity and what that means for me and share that in ways that are important and authentic. And I'm going to respect and affirm and value the identities that others have when they come to us. And today, though, you'll have an aha moment, something that'll be just a little bit different. Maybe you've thought about it before, but you didn't quite twist it, hadn't quite thought of it in a way you had before. I want you to share that aha moment with us as you go through the day and as we come to the end of the day. And take a little bit of time with that aha moment to put one more tool in your toolkit so that indeed we can build the culture and the community that we so sincerely appreciate around us. Well, I'm excited to work with you today. I'm really excited to start this work with you today. Coming to the table is about welcoming, making sure that everybody has a seat at the table, and it's also about joining when the opportunity presents itself that you fully engage too. I'm looking forward to engaging with you. Thank you. Thank you for your commitment today. So with that, it's my great pleasure to introduce somebody who can reflect on this a little bit. I said we need a little bit of help to understand where we were as a culture and identity and help us think about things a little bit differently. In just a moment, I'm going to introduce Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler and ask her to share some of the wisdom that she has in the things that she's observed. Now, I got to be honest with you. I wish I had a title like Nita Mosby-Tyler's title. She's the chief catalyst for the Equity Project in Denver, Colorado. What does it mean to be the chief catalyst officer? That means that you take a spark, a nugget, and you help other people transform their organization. She has a PhD in organizational management. She comes by that through rigorous academic pursuit, but also through the practice of helping organizations change. Nita Mosby-Tyler's terrific in this. A consultant as accredited by Georgetown University, that National Center for Cultural Competence, and she's nationally recognized for her equity work. But I'll tell you, in getting to know Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler, I want you to know that this is one of the most authentic, smartest people I've ever been around. And she has the way for being able to entertain great ideas, tough ideas, sophisticated ideas, and do it with humor, and do it with intention, and to help you get along the way. So Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler is going to join us and speak to us a little bit now about how we start this journey together, this journey of trust, empathy, identity, and adding tools to our toolkit. Welcome, Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler.
I'm checking on you. Are you awake out there? Awesome. Thank you so much for carving some time out of your schedule today. I don't know if you were coerced to be here, or if you came here on your own, but by whatever means you arrived, I am so thrilled to see each and every one of you. There are some familiar faces in the room. I had some opportunities last year to meet some of you when Caroline and I conducted focus groups with you and interviews, so it's really nice to see your faces again. You know, I thought I would start with filling in a little blank about me, just so you know what you might expect in the next hour with me. I wanted you to know a little bit about my background. In 2016, I was the Senior Vice President of Human Resources and Chief Inclusion Officer at Children's Hospital, Colorado. It is a fantastic organization, and to be really honest with you, it was a dream job for me. I had worked my entire career to be at this place where I could sit in a top-tier pediatric hospital. And there I was. After almost 30 years in HR, I think I'd arrived at where I wanted to be. And just like you, I had goals about how I wanted my career to run, and there I was. You will also remember in 2016, our presidential election happened. And I don't know about you, but one of the things that I saw pretty quickly is that we were beginning to polarize as a country, in our communities, and even in the workplace around our ability to talk about really difficult things like race and racism and all of the other social issues that we had. And if I can just be really honest with you for a second, I actually couldn't sleep at night knowing that we couldn't have conversations with one another. And because I couldn't sleep at night, and I couldn't sleep at night because I didn't want to go through such a period in our society, because I felt like I had already gone through such a period in our society. My story is I grew up in the segregated South. I grew up in the Jim Crow era when I can tell you, I remember drinking from a colored water fountain. I remember my family just attempting to do normal things that we would consider normal things, and there would be Negroes not allowed signs everywhere we went. I went to the University of Alabama, Roll Tide. Don't say anything. So. And when I got there, the Klan was burning crosses there because they didn't want black students there. So I felt like I'd already lived through this really difficult time in history. And in 2016, it was a little bit of a flashback for me. My commitment was I didn't want to go through that again, nor did I want you to go through that, or your children or your grandchildren. I just didn't want anybody to have a lived experience that looked like the one that I had. So, because I felt very strongly about that, I made the biggest decision I've ever made in my life. And that decision was to leave the organization that I loved so dearly to do something new. And the something new for me was to launch the Equity Project. And the Equity Project is an organization that I founded that is really designed to do what I'm doing right now. It is to travel the country working with all kinds of organizations, sectors, and systems so that we might have conversations about things like diversity, inclusion, equity, and equality in a way that I think is really different than the way that we've had the conversations historically. So my stories will come to life in my time with you today. I'll be sharing quite a bit of those. And my goal is to have you to start thinking about how these difficult topics actually are about you too. And I want you to begin to see yourself in everything that we're talking about. So a couple of things to think about in our time together. I don't have a bunch of ground rules, but I do have one philosophy that I want to share with you. I believe in something called spaces filled with grace. Now, I know that many of you have heard of or have used the phrase safe spaces, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't use safe spaces because I don't know what safety means for people, so I just don't use it. What I use instead is spaces filled with grace. And here's what a space filled with grace means to me. A space filled with grace means that you can learn together, grow together, have difficult conversations together, screw up, say the wrong thing, and still not worry about being judged and critiqued throughout the process. That's what a space filled with grace is. And so when I do this work, it is my philosophy about the way that you do the work. And so you will find that that's important to me in our time together today. So show of hands, is a space filled with grace okay with you today? All right. Some of you didn't raise your hand. I don't know what space you're expecting. I just got to tell you, it's the only space I know how to to facilitate. So thank you for those of you that raised your hand. Let me start with this slide. It's a very important visual. So if I ask you to caption this, what would you say? Now this is the part where you talk. What would you say? How would you caption this? Give me some thoughts. We're all going down. What else? Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's not our problem, not yet. Sort of Titanic-like. Yeah. Thank you. What else? How else would you caption this? Yes. What goes around comes around. You're the first person that has said that. That's right. Good. Any other thoughts about how you'd caption this? Yes.
First thing I saw is I've seen this way too much in my life.
I've seen this.
Really kind of been sinking in first.
Yes, I've seen this way too much in my life, and I've usually been on the sinking end. So there are all kinds, thank you for that. There are all kinds of ways for you to caption this. The point of including it is I want you to keep it at the forefront of your thinking as we go through our time together this morning. You know, here's the deal. We really are in the same boat. But what I want you to remember about the boat is that there are different things that happen in the boat. And so I'm going to challenge you to disrupt what your consciousness might be about the boat that you're in. So some of us in this room are sitting at the top end of the boat, and that's our consciousness. The boat is just going along swimmingly. Some of us in this room are sitting at the bottom of this boat, where it feels like it's sinking for us and we're bailing out water. There are some of you that are sort of in the middle of the boat where you straddle both sides of this. The reality is you have to have a consciousness about all parts of the boat because it is the same boat. So as I go along this morning, I want you to just continue to think about where your consciousness is about the boat and how you might shift that in your interactions with colleagues and community. So I thought I'd share a few things with you, and then I'm going to ask you to have some conversations at your tables. I live in Denver, and I've been in Colorado 24 years now, but my work takes me across the country. And in my work, I get to see things that make each state different, and I get to see things that make each state a little bit the same. There are some common themes about what I see in my work. But there's one common thing that I see wherever I go. It doesn't matter if it's urban or rural, doesn't matter what the city looks like. There is one thing that people share, and it is this. People have diversity fatigue. So my question to you is now, show of hands, how many of you have ever heard of diversity fatigue? Just show me your hands if you've heard of it before. Okay, just a handful of people. Now, even if you haven't heard of it before, and there's nothing wrong if you haven't heard about it before, what do you think it means to have diversity fatigue? What does that mean? What do you think it means? This is the part where you talk again. What do you think it means? Yes, thank you.
Mic check. Here you go, buddy.
Thank you. You got the mic.
So, like, if you are on the side of the fence where you're receiving a lack of diversity, you might be tired of the fact that you've constantly been in this situation. And on the other side of the fence, if you've never had to deal with diversity in your life, you might think, oh, I'm sick of seeing all these people complaining about being oppressed or whatever all the time. And so I think it comes from two different perspectives.
Yeah.
And so that's what I would interpret it as.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you just beautifully qualified that image of the boat, too. It really is two sides of the equation as you think about what diversity fatigue might be. Thank you for that. Other thoughts about what diversity fatigue means or what it means to you? Any other thoughts about that? There's one right over here. This is like The Price is Right. They're going to run the mic down there, and then you're going to win a car. You can project. It's coming, though. It's right behind you.
I would say that I think that there is an idea, like, can't we just do our jobs?
Yeah.
You know, I'm a biologist, you know, can I focus on my research and my teaching? So from an educator's perspective, and yet this is a very important issue. So, but I think that people sometimes feel like, oh, wait a second, aren't I supposed to be doing this other thing? And now you're telling me I should work on diversity.
Yes, thank you for sharing that too. And oftentimes what happens in diversity fatigue is it feels like we've got these competing priorities. You want to get your job done and you want to focus on diversity, and do you need to sacrifice one for the other is an absolute indicator of diversity fatigue. Thank you for that. How about one more? One more thought about it. Here's one way over here. You're going to get your exercise, whoever has the mic.
I got it.
Okay, thank you.
One other like interpretation that I've had just in like popular culture recently is kind of the angst that comes with almost offending someone, you know, with that has a diverse background or characteristic where you do want to acknowledge it, but you also don't want to offend them personally. And I think that's gotten to a point where it's like hard to, you know, overcome that sometimes.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying. I think we've gotten so politically correct and afraid of some of these conversations that the outcome is that we've stopped having conversations, period. It's just too risky for us. So that's absolutely right, and it causes diversity fatigue when that happens. So thank you all for sharing your ideas about what diversity fatigue means, and everybody that spoke, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what diversity fatigue is, and now I'm going to share with you in not such an eloquent way, because you said it also eloquently, what it means to have diversity fatigue. Diversity fatigue is, I'm just sick and tired of talking about diversity. That's it. That's it. So I want to share this with you, and it's hard. We all have it. Everybody in this room has or has had or will have diversity fatigue. It doesn't discriminate. It doesn't care what color you are. It doesn't care where you came from. It doesn't discriminate. So each of us can have it. But why does Nita want to talk to you about diversity fatigue? I want to talk to you about diversity fatigue because if we don't get it under control, we really do lose our ability to do the things the Dean is talking about, like creating a sense of belongingness and creating inclusion can't really happen while diversity fatigue is prominent and present. So I want to tell you a few things about diversity fatigue because I want you to have the tools to work on it. And the first thing I want you to know, well, there's 4 things. That's the first thing. I just want you to know it's a thing. I do want you to know that I didn't make it up. It really is a phenomenon that's happening. So that's the first thing. The second thing, I do want you to know that when we have diversity fatigue, it comes from somewhere. It's rooted in something. So I told you my story a few minutes ago about growing up in the segregated South and the stuff that I went through there. That's the root of my diversity fatigue. That's the root. The root of my diversity fatigue is that I have been talking about race and racism since I was about 4 years old. So I'm exhausted from having those conversations over and over and over again. Now, your job is to determine the root of yours. It doesn't have to match mine. This isn't matchy-matchy. But you do need to start thinking about where yours is rooted, really important. And you could have multiple places that your diversity fatigue is rooted. So be thinking about the root of yours. The third thing that I want you to know is that diversity fatigue is always, always triggered by something. So you don't just wake up in the morning and say, oh, it's a beautiful day, I've got diversity fatigue. It doesn't work like that. It gets triggered by something. So I'm just going to keep sharing my story. I don't want to put you on the spot, but I do want you to start thinking about the ways in which it could be triggered in you. So here's my trigger. I get triggered in my diversity fatigue anytime somebody starts talking about how they're discriminated against. I'm not saying it's right, I'm telling you it's a trigger. When a person starts to talk about how they're discriminated against, my brain, my little brain, goes immediately to comparing what they just said to a separate water fountain, a Negroes Not Allowed sign, and a cross burning on your college campus. That's what my brain does. That's how my trigger works. It's not fair, it's not right, it's a trigger. I want you to know the same. What are those things that trigger you in your diversity fatigue? And why do I want you to know what triggers you? Because when you get triggered, your body starts doing stuff. So I know what my body does too when I'm triggered, because I've studied me a whole lot. So here's what happens to my body when I'm triggered. I do some major eye rolling when I'm triggered. Major. I also do some real deep sighing, like when I'm triggered. I also do this weird thing. I got to step out here so you can see it. It looks like this. Yeah, I do that. And then the nail marks are on the side of my face. I do that when I'm triggered. Now, your triggers might have a different visceral reaction. You might feel the hair on the back of your neck stand up. If you're a person that identifies as white or you have lighter skin, you might just get flushed. It's the benefit of being black. You can't tell that I'm being flushed, but I am. So all of these things might be happening. You might be clenching your jaws, and all kinds of things happen to the body when you are triggered. I want you to know what your body is doing, because the whole time your body is doing it, somebody is looking at you. And they are making judgments about what your body language means. And if you want a good case for what I'm talking about, I want you to think about law enforcement for a minute. I work with lots of law enforcement agencies across the country. These are men and women that see the same things over and over and over and over again. It creates a diversity fatigue in them. And when it creates a diversity fatigue, there's a visceral reaction that they have that the community is looking at in their body language. And then the community begins to make assumptions about what that body language might mean. So I'm sharing this with you because I don't want you to have that as a risk factor. If you don't know how your diversity fatigue is manifesting, then it's really hard to create systems of inclusion. So this is what I'd like to have us do. 5 minutes, we won't take long, at your tables. I want you to talk about diversity fatigue for a minute. And I'd like for you at your tables to talk about how you're seeing diversity fatigue show up. How's it showing up in you, if you feel comfortable talking about that? If you're not comfortable talking about yourself, how are you seeing it show up in other people? How's it showing up at school? How's it showing up in your community? Even how is it showing up in your family? Because it will show up in our families too if we don't talk about it. So 5 minutes, let's just talk about that, and then I'll bring us back together, do a little sharing, and we'll keep going. Thanks. Okay, everybody, let me bring us back together. Thank you for your conversations. I appreciate it. I got a chance to eavesdrop on some of your conversations. I thank you for that. So I want to spend just a minute having a few folks at a few tables share out some of your conversations, just the essence of your conversation. What are you seeing? Now, here's the qualifier. If your colleague starts staring at you at your table, that means you've been voluntold and that you're the speaker. So if you wonder how you got the mic, that's how it happens. All right, so how about volunteers that might be willing to share what you talked about at your table? You win a car. Okay, there's one over here. Dean, I don't know where these cars are going to come from, but just. Thank you.
Hi. So our table, we talked about feeling defensive sometimes about the ways in which we ourselves are different and wanting to fit in. And then that kind of leads to this thing which you mentioned before, of not being able to talk about it, even if we want to, that we're not comfortable doing that. So that would be what we see.
Thank you for sharing that. You're absolutely right. It's hard sometimes to be inclusive when you don't feel like you're being recognized in your own diversities. And we're going to talk about that in a minute because it's an important thing not to dismiss. Very important. So thank you for that. All right, how about one or two more? Okay, one right here. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you. So our table basically talked about how we can get diversity fatigue if, like from where I'm from, in Alaska, we have a lot of Alaska Native groups who are still talking about diversity and inclusion, and we get sometimes tired, like, hey, maybe we've given you enough, when really that's maybe not the right viewpoint. Like I've seen a lot of people where I'm from have that mentality.
Mm-hmm. So I love what you're saying. Well, I don't really love it, but you know what I mean. Here's what I love about what you're saying. There is a thought process that at some point we ought to just be done. And you've raised an important point for us that I'm going to talk about next. I'll pay you later. But we'll talk about that. There is a belief system that we ought to be finished. Why are we still talking about this? We've helped you. You should have equality by now. Not sure why you're still talking about this. All of that is still relevant and an important point for you to have brought up at your table. So thank you for that. Thank you. All right. I know we have a hand up here and a hand back here. Thank you.
So we talked a lot about the frustration of having events like this that are really awesome and inclusive and create dialogue, but don't result in change.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty.
Yeah. So thank you for your vulnerability as a table in talking about this and then you sharing it out. I can tell you that that's the number one issue anywhere I go is creating spaces to have the dialogue not translating into action so that it becomes a part of the culture. It's a very large challenge no matter what the organization is. And I also think we've not really done a good job in our country in helping people to translate things into operational things and actions too. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit too, that sometimes I think what we're trying to do is so big and overwhelming that it starts then to compete against what we think our real jobs are. And so the go-to position is we'll just focus on our real jobs and leave that over there. So we'll talk about that, but thank you for raising it. I know that, did I see your hand? Somebody at this, I saw your hand, didn't I? Okay, I'll do it up here because I've got the mic.
I came from a place that was very diverse, and coming here, we kind of talked about sometimes I feel resentment towards people who don't see the issues, but that's mostly based on just miseducation, in not being informed, and so that's where I get a lot of stress from.
So I'm thankful that you shared that, because some of the diversity fatigue comes from an exhaustion from not having people understand your point of view, your lived experience, what you're going through. When people can't understand that over and over and over again, it means you're constantly in a position of having to illuminate it so people can see it, which is exhausting. So I get what you're saying very much. And if I start multiplying that in this room, in many ways, although differently, each of you, in many ways, have been in a position where you've had to defend or to lift up or shine a light on who you are, and you want that to be included in what we're talking about. And that's what we will have to do to create a system of inclusion. To create a system of inclusion doesn't mean that you're shining a flashlight on just one group of people. It actually means you're shining a flashlight on all people, and that all diversities matter. But it also means that you have to tell the truth about some things, that our country really wasn't built for all diversities. This isn't personal. It's the construction of the country. Our country was built by white men for white men. It's not anti-white man. I'm just telling you that's the history. And so if you're not a white man, I would say to you that the system really wasn't designed or constructed for you in the first place. And so for all of you that aren't a white man in the room, you have had to be retrofit in a system that wasn't constructed for you. If you're a woman, if you're a person of color, if your gender identity isn't male or female, if you're a young person, I can go on and on with all of the diversities where the system wasn't built for you. Now, what's important about what I just said is we should not and cannot be translating what I just said into white men are not important. And we've done that quite a bit in our country. Here's the deal. Everybody's important. White men are important. White women are important. Black people are important. Brown people are important. Gay and straight people are important. I can go on and on and on. Everyone is important. And so a part of reconciling this diversity fatigue piece is us getting comfortable with saying what we mean when we use these words. So let me just take you through some of this. I always use this visual to prove a point or to make a point. And my point here is we have spent a lot of time in our country confusing words. Not because we're not competent, but because we have used words so interchangeably historically that people actually don't know the difference between the words now. That causes diversity fatigue. When you heard diversity for 20 years and now you're talking about equity, that causes diversity fatigue. When you were talking about inclusion yesterday and now you're talking about equality, that causes diversity fatigue. So the play between these words is important for us to talk about. And I just want to lift up a few things about these words. I picked these four, not because they're the only four. I mean, you could add fairness and justice and social justice and about 20 other words, but I picked these four because these are the four that get confused most often. We use them interchangeably, or people just don't know how they're different. And so because we don't delineate well between the words, it goes back to what our colleague said in the back, then we can't operationalize it. It's hard to figure out the action if we've not delineated what happens under each of these words well. So this slide just says a couple of things that I want you to remember. One, it says that these four words are on a continuum, meaning you're just going to go up and down the continuum depending on what you're doing. I mean, in this college, there might be some initiatives that really meet the definition of diversity. It's diversity work. And in this same college could be initiatives that are really about inclusion. You could be running initiatives in this college under all 4 of these categories at the same time. It's just a continuum. But what this is not is a math equation. So diversity plus inclusion does not equal equity. Diversity does not equal inclusion. So it's not math. So if anybody has you convinced that this is math, I want to dispel that myth right now. None of this is math. It's just a continuum. So one of the ways to think about these 4 words in particular is to think about the words like gears. The diversity gear turns the inclusion gear, that turns the equality gear, that turns the equity gear. They just turn each other. And all that really means is they are hinging on one another. And so the reality is when you stop working on one, all the gears stop turning. So they really count on each other. And it's one of the reasons the dean keeps talking about the focus on inclusion. If you stop focusing on one, they all just freeze in place. So we have to start thinking about the interplay between the words. Now, I just want to deconstruct 2 things for you. I can deconstruct equity and equality for you, but I really want to pull diversity and inclusion apart for you because you've talked about diversity and inclusion so much on this campus and in your college. I want to give you some history. And I know this isn't history class, but I think it's important, no matter how long you've been doing this work or contemplating this work, to know the history of how we got here and such a divide around our ability to talk about these topics. I want to start with the word diversity. Question for you, and I know we've got all kinds of age diversity in this room. Question for you, what decade was it when we first started talking about diversity a lot? It was the diversity movement. It was very campaigny. Everything was about celebrating diversity. Do you know what decade that was? Don't say 2020. Any guesses? I heard 90s and I heard 70s. Any more guesses? 50s, 60s. Don't you love this? 50s, 60s, 70s, 90s. Did anybody say 80s? Now everybody's going to raise their hand. Oh, we all said 80s. All right. It was the 1980s. That was the onset of the diversity movement. So here's the next question. Even if you weren't born yet, why would we have been talking about diversity so much in the 1980s? Do you know what was going on in the 1980s besides bad hair? Yeah, easy. Yeah, I had it too. What epidemic was happening? AIDS epidemic was happening. The HIV and AIDS epidemic was happening in the 1980s. Pandemonium. We didn't know what to do with it. We were flailing, and we started stereotyping people right there in that moment. We decided white, gay men were the picture of AIDS, as if it was just going to stay right there in that box. So we were doing a lot of stereotyping in the 80s. There was another epidemic that happened in the 80s. War on drugs. The crack cocaine epidemic. That also happened in the 1980s. We did the same sort of pandemonium and stereotyping. We decided that crack cocaine was black inner city people, like it was just going to stay right there in that box. That's a Siri contributing. Inclusive. Go away. Diversity fatigue. A couple of other things happened in the 1980s I just want you to be aware of. One, women were coming into the workplace in greater numbers in the 1980s and going into leadership roles. We had not seen that so much before the 80s. Also in the 80s, people of color were coming into the workplace in greater numbers and going into leadership roles, and we'd not seen that so much. Reaganomics was happening. Affirmative action was happening in the 1980s. And you know, affirmative action was about righting a historical wrong around racial discrimination and hiring practices. All of that was happening in the 1980s. And I want you to know about that, like what was in the diversity movement, because I want you to be clear about what happened in that moment. It has everything to do with what we're doing today. So I'm giving you a personal account of what happened because I was a diversity trainer in the 1980s in a national organization. We had two jobs in the diversity movement. One, we needed to tell people why diversity was a good thing. Even though the train had already left the station, we needed to convince organizations why diversity was good. Two, we needed to define what the word diversity meant. Those are the only two things we needed to do. And so here's what happened in those rooms, and this is what I want you to sit with. In those rooms, we said things like this. Diversity is good. It's good for the bottom line. It gives you a variety of thought, and that's about as far as we went with it. Now, how compelling is that? The second thing we did is we defined the word diversity, and it is right here that I will announce to you that I think that is where the two great travesties happened. I call it the travesty of what we did to white people in diversity training in the 1980s and the travesty of what we did to people of color in diversity training in the 1980s, because here's how it went. We defined the word diversity as everything that wasn't white. Explicitly, that's what we said. So if you were a white person in the room, what you heard was that diversity wasn't you. If you were a person of color in the room, what you heard is that diversity was you. And then we went on about our lives. Now, let's fast forward to 2020. If we all told the truth, when we hear the word diversity, our brains go straight to race. Just immediately, it goes to race when we hear that word. Am I right? Yeah. I wanted you to know why your brain goes straight to race. It goes straight to race because the word diversity was introduced in that way. We have to disrupt that. Race is a diversity. It is not the definition of diversity. What I've got on the screen is the world according to Nita's definition of diversity. I believe that diversity is about the richness and the beauty of the differences of all of us. Everybody in this room represents diversity, and it's beautiful. But we didn't set up the conversation in the 80s to talk about it like that. We didn't talk about the richness and the beauty of difference because we didn't really want to talk about difference. And so here we are now, needing to talk about difference. So I wanted you to know the history so that you can think about what to do about it. And so thinking about how to make this actionable, one, get the definition right, hold people accountable to the correct definition, and three, disrupt the old way of thinking any way you can. And here's an example of how you do it. When I walk into a room, and it looks like the room is all men or people that identify as male, my old way of thinking would have been, there's no diversity in this room. My new way of thinking is to say what I mean. What I mean is, I don't see any gender diversity in the room. So when you walk in a room and you say, I don't see any diversity, you really are being dismissive of the people that are sitting in the room, even if they all look the same. You're making an assumption that you know about all of their diversities. So the tip here is to say exactly what you mean. If you're a person of color and you walk in a room and it looks like the room is all white identifying people, don't say, I don't see any diversity. Say what you mean. Say, I don't see any racial ethnic diversity. So the more we can get explicit about what we're trying to say, the better. People then learn and see themselves in the definition that you're talking about. So I believe you will never have inclusion if people don't see themselves in the definition of diversity. So if there's anybody in this room that can't identify with the word diversity because they feel like they're not in it, they're not going to probably be inclusive. It's just how it works. So we've got to start there. And that doesn't mean we're starting from the beginning. It actually means we are disrupting old paradigms about what the word actually means. So anywhere that you can go to invite people into the definition matters. Quick story, and then I'm going to keep going. I do a lot of work in Grand Junction at Colorado Mesa University. And I did a talk about a year ago, and there were 800 people in the room, mostly a white audience in the room, too. And when I finished, a gentleman walked up to me, looked like he might have been in his 60s, and he had his arms folded, and I thought, oh, here we go. And he said, there's something I want to say to you. And I said, sure. And he got really weepy, and he said, do you know, I am in my late 60s, and no one ever has told me that I am diversity. So I share that story with you, not to get a reaction out of you, but to tell you where our work is. We don't want any human being that's in their 60s to be able to ever say that again, that they did not know that they were a part of diversity. So anything that we can do to fulfill that, to create the right definition, we have an obligation to be doing that with each other. And the same with inclusion. Inclusion really is about belongingness. We really do want each one of you, and even the people that are not in this room, to feel like there is a place for them in this college and at this university. And if there's anything about the system or behaviors that don't allow people to feel like they belong for whatever the reason is, then we still have work to do. That's what inclusion is all about. So those two go together in so many ways, but we have to get the first one right before inclusion itself works. So I wanted you to know the history about diversity. Very quickly, I also want to tell you this, so I can just tell you the truth about something. Underneath a lot of our feelings around race, around sexuality, around gender and gender identity, underneath all of these things are biases sometimes, and sometimes just flat out fear. Sometimes we're just afraid. And it's hard to admit sometimes that we're afraid, and so the behaviors come out in all kinds of ways. And I just want to normalize fear for a minute, because we all have it. There is always something about what we're talking about that scares us a little bit. We're either afraid that we're going to use the wrong words, or that somebody bit our head off the last time we did something and we don't want to do it again. All of those things will happen. I wanted you to know how fear is shaped. It comes in two categories. Fear is something called the state of fear, and fear is something called the trait of fear. And I want you to know how it works. So the state of fear is you're afraid of something because of something that happened to you before. That's why you're scared. You parked your car in that neighborhood, they broke into your car, you're not going back over there because that happened to you. That's the state of fear. And then there's the trait of fear. The trait of fear is real too. It's not one real, one fake. They're both real. Trait is you're afraid of something because of a perceived danger that you're feeling. Your gut tells you something, or you saw it on TV, or your best friend told you. Whatever the case is, it's never happened to you before, but it still makes you afraid. So we sit in both of those. And I want you to start thinking about how you're situated in your fear. What keeps you from having conversations? What keeps you from being in proximity to people that don't look like you? What keeps you from fill in the blank? Is it state of fear? Is it trait of fear? Now, the thing that's important about this is sometimes these fear bases show up in us unconsciously. And so I want to just tell you a really quick story about how it can look so you can think about it a little bit more. So I am married to a pastor, and one of our hobbies is we just like to go out to eat a lot. I just like to experience different restaurants. And so it's just a thing. So there's a phenomenon that happens every time we go out to eat that I want to share with you that really highlights what I'm talking about here. We get seated by the host or the hostess. And as we're getting seated, I do this every time we go. I lean into my husband. You got to play husband with me for a minute. And I go, wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. And when we get seated, the white lady that has her purse on the back of her chair moves her purse when we get seated from the back of her chair to the front like that, just like that. We have counted 202 times that that has happened, just like that. So what you're not going to hear me say is that I think all white women are racist, and you're not going to hear me say that I think all white women have been robbed by a pastor and his wife. Neither one of those, because I don't believe either. But what I do believe, which is why I'm sharing the story, is that is exactly what the trait of fear can look like in action if we don't start thinking about these kinds of things. There's a behavior attached with it. So I wanted to share that with you because you could be the culprit or the victim of it happening unconsciously. I think this is what unconscious bias can make us do. So I wanted you to know what it looks like. Now, the part of the deal with me is it hurts. It just hurts over and over and over again every time it happens to me. And it certainly hurts the pastor over and over and over again when it happens to him. And I haven't figured out what to do with the hurt. So a part of the way that I've dealt with it is just sharing the story with you. So there are going to be some things that happen out of either state and trait or fear to you where you will be in the same position. And you might think, how do I handle the hurt? And what you do next is important. Now, what does not work for me when this move the purse thing happens is to turn around and tap the lady on the shoulder and go, I am not going to steal your purse. That is not in my keeping with who I am. But we're going to have to think about what our behaviors are going to be when it's time to address something. And that just takes me quickly to this. We have to figure out how to pause. We are pretty robotic in how we do almost everything. We go, 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 go. You go, go, go at school. You go, go, go at home. You go, go, go at work. And so this topic doesn't allow for that. This topic will require that we pause to think it through. What are we saying next? What are we doing next? So it's not robotic work. This is a picture of me when I was 7 and clearly not looking real happy. And it was right before I was running away from home. I was running away from home because I was tired of the civil rights movement, and I kept saying to my parents, why have you adults just screwed up everything and now nobody knows how to fix it? So my dad gave me this really academic answer about how to fix it, and my mom was saying, I don't know what to do, and none of it made sense to me. And I said, well, since you all don't know what to do, I'll just go fix the civil rights movement myself. And that's a picture of me leaving to go fix it. Except right before I walked out, my dad said, hey, wait a minute before you go. I want to get my camera. I want to take a picture of you before you leave so I can remember what you look like. And that's what this is. The point is we have to figure out a way to pause to make good decisions about what we're doing here. This work is that important. So just food for thought for you. I want you to start thinking about times when you did insert a pause in what you were doing and the outcome was better because of it. And then I want you to think of times where you did not insert a pause in what you were doing and the outcome was not good because you did not insert a pause in what you were doing. And then I want you to think about ways in the college that you can institutionalize pause. What can you build into the system that allows you to pause so you can make the best decisions possible around these topic areas and not be so reactive to things that happen? So the power of the pause is important. Do y'all remember this movie? It's my favorite movie, Rush Hour, and it's actually my favorite scene. Do you know the words that are coming out of my mouth? All right, so quickly, we have to start thinking about the words that are coming out of our mouths. So one thing that is true, as people change, language changes. And so to use old language on new issues just doesn't work. And so I know that diversity fatigue sometimes is caused by language, like trying to keep up with what to call people and what not to say and what to say. Language is a big diversity fatigue culprit. But we have to keep talking about it. And so this is just an example of a thing you can do. So I just call this words, words, words. I use this in my own organization. And so it's an exercise that you would do where you just talk about words. It's not the right and wrong. It is the let's have dialogue about the word. So I always start with that first one. One or two words or phrases that irritate you every time you hear them. That's what we talk about. And so I'll tell you one of mine right now. I don't like the way we talk about people that are in the millennial age group. I'm biased because I have 3 children that are in the millennial age group, and I think they're great. I don't like when we badmouth young people because young people are the people that will carry the torch for what our country will do next and our world will do next. And bad-mouthing them doesn't help that at all. So whenever somebody says something negative about millennials, I start to clench. It is something that irritates me. Each of us has those words that irritate us every time we hear them. Sometimes we call it out, sometimes we just sit with it. The goal here is for groups of people to start talking about those words or phrases that irritate them when you hear them so that you can do something about it. It's really important to get that out on the table. Imagine the horror when you find out that you've been saying these words for 20 years and there have been people at the table that are nauseated because you've been saying these words for 20 years. So to talk about that's important. These are just sample words. African American or black, those still trip us up a little bit too. We don't know. If you're not black, can you say black? My mother grew up in a generation where black was short for blackie, so it was derogatory for her. She didn't like black. I'm fine with black. I know what you can't call me, but African American and black are fine. But we should talk about that. And then words like queer. If you're not queer, can you say queer? What does queer actually mean? Some of you are old enough to remember when queer was a bad word, and now it's a reclaimed word. And it's hard when you've lived through generations of it being bad and now not bad. How do you use it? Handicapped. We have handicap stickers and handicap parking spaces, but is that what you call people? I would say no, person first, person living with a disability. But the word is still present. What do we do with it? And then subordinates. We use that word a lot. It's buried in our policies, but is it an appropriate thing to call each other subordinate? So keep talking about language, really important. I want to jump to this slide. One, because I'm in the College of Agricultural Sciences, and there has to be an animal. Let me just tell you about the picture because it has nothing to do with the words. I was at a conference talking to that lady and an ass walked up. Seriously. That's what happened. So that's just classic. So I had to stick it there. It's the words I want you to remember, though. The words are this. 20-60-20 rule. I want you to remember this. As you are doing this work, this inclusion work, really focusing on all of the things that I've talked about, 20% of the people, even in this room, are going to love you and they're going to be with you every step of the way. They're forgiving. You can screw up. They're going to be with you. It's fine. 60% of the people will be tentative. They won't sabotage what you're doing or talking about, but they might not know how to engage in what you're talking about. They might need a little more help. And then 20% of the people are never going to be with you. You're not interested in this, and they're not going to advance what you're talking about. I wanted you to know this because I want you to be able to prioritize what you're doing. Now, if you're like me, you want everybody to change and everybody to get on board, which means you want to focus on the 20% at the bottom. What I'm going to say to you is, while you're doing that, we lose this beautiful opportunity to work with 80% of the people. And so reprioritizing how you're doing this really matters, even in your personal lives. Don't spend all your time fighting with people. Go to the people that really need to know how to engage in what you're talking about, or that are already engaged and you're just not paying attention to them. So 20-60-20, really important. This is an important one too. I want you to know about the triangle. That's me again. 8 years old, feeling great about myself. And my little brother next to me, not feeling great about myself. And my dad in the background, not paying attention to either one of us. So that's how the triangle works. You are going to do something and you're going to think you did a great job. What you said was great, what you did was great. Right next to you in the same uniform is somebody that thinks what you just did was terrible. And then in the back, the person that's supposed to be in charge of all of it is not even looking. So I shared this photo with you as a reminder that your triangle can't be the only place that you get your validation. You have to figure out where you're going to be anchored. Where will you get your support if your support doesn't come from the typical triangle? So I just want to remind you to be anchored in what's important to you. Some of you, it's your family, it's your church, it's your community, whatever that anchoring is. Make sure that you have that in place so that you always feel validated to keep going. And Dr. Shannon, you said this earlier. The goal is not perfection in this work. The goal is excellence. Don't let anybody convince you that you have to be perfect. You're just not. It's an unreasonable expectation. So know that excellence gives us an opportunity to keep learning and to keep growing and to make mistakes even to be better. So perfection is not our goal. And then I want to end with this. This is a story that is very emotional for me, so just bear with me for a minute as I share it with you. This is a really old picture of me at 5 years old. I clearly wanted to be a ballerina. And so I said to my mother, I want to be a ballerina. And she, of course, rolled her eyes and said, sure. And she took me to a ballet school. We got to the ballet school, and when we got to the counter, the people at the counter said, we don't accept Negroes. So my mother didn't say a word. We just got back in the car, and she just promptly drove to the next ballet school. We got to the second ballet school, and we got to the counter, and they said, we don't accept Negroes. So we got back in the car and again didn't say a word, and my mother then drove to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, and 6th ballet school. And every one of them said, we don't accept Negroes. So this time I said to my mom, why don't they want me? And my mom looked at me, I remember it like it was yesterday, and she said, because they don't know how excellent you are yet. Which was beautiful and makes no sense when you're 5. So I was devastated. So the next day, I go, remember these are segregation times, I go to my all-black inner city kindergarten, walk into kindergarten, and a few minutes later, that lady walked in. That's Miss Ann. So she walked in, and we were stunned. First of all, we'd never even seen a white person at our school before. Second, we'd never seen one like her. She was a ballerina. And she walked in leotard tights and a tutu. And she was standing in front of us. And she said, good morning, class. And we all said, good morning. She said, my name is Miss Ann. I'm going to be your ballet teacher. And that's the end of the story. Here's the moral of the story. I am crystal clear that I'm standing on the shoulders of my ancestors, giants that look just like me. I wouldn't be here without the things that they went through. But I'm also crystal clear about the way in which inclusion works and equity works. And sometimes it comes in unsuspecting packages. And this is a picture of that. Equity can come in unsuspecting packages. I learned it right there when I was 5 years old. I also learned this about equity. I learned that it takes bravery and courage to do this work. I learned that at 5 years old. is I want you to remember the time that we were in. She wasn't even supposed to be in that neighborhood, let alone bucking the system, which is exactly what she was doing. That takes bravery and courage to do. And the last thing I'll share that I learned right here is that this equity work takes love and caring. And if you don't have that in you, you're not going to do it. And so I wanted to share the story with you very selfishly, because I actually believe what you're setting yourselves up to do here is Miss Ann work. That what you are talking about today, and what you have a dean that's committed to doing this work, and a faculty and staff that are behind you 100%. What you're committing to is Miss Ann work. It means that you will disrupt the status quo, that you will make a way for people that wouldn't otherwise have a way, that belongingness and inclusion will just become the fabric of who you are. That's Miss Ann work. So I want to thank you for positioning yourselves for that. That's exactly what you're doing. And the last thing I will say to you is I also don't want you to forget who the Miss Anns were in your life. Because it is no accident that you're sitting here today. Each one of you has a story about somebody that influenced you in some way to be sitting exactly where you're sitting today. Don't forget who that was in your life, and let them be the catalyst for what you do next. So I thank you. Thank you for your Miss Ann focus, your Miss Ann work, and I thank you for all of the things that I know are in front of you. Let everything behind you be the catalyst for what you'll do next. And I know it will be great things. So, muchas gracias. I'm so thankful for your time. I appreciate you. And before I get off the stage, if there are any questions at all, I am happy. I even made you a fire. I am happy. You have to have a fire if it's a fireside chat. I'm happy to answer any questions at all that you might have, or entertain any comments that you might have. And I'm interested in whether or not this was helpful. Can you do something with some of the things that I talked about? Should I do karaoke? No. Yes, the mic's coming to you.
One of the things that you said earlier about that 63-year-old gentleman, I'm 51, and I have to say that that's the first time, too, that I felt like I was diverse and that I was actually included. Because at the same time, I went through so many things where I was the outsider because I was a white male and had no control over that. And so I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. We have a lot of work to do, so everybody knows that the definition is them. Yeah. Anything else? Yes, thank you.
Hi, thank you for this presentation.
You're welcome.
I'm an ecologist, and as many in this room, as ecologists, we discuss a lot about the role of biodiversity, and we are very aware of all the beauty and all the importance and the service that biodiversity does in natural ecosystems. And there is no real question that every being or even non-living, sometimes in ecology participate and belong to this diversity that we need to appreciate, we need to maintain, and that provide all the goods that we live on. And now in agricultural, we are really looking a lot on how to embrace that thought on how we manage agricultural system and bring that diversity and richness inside agricultural systems. My question is, has that appreciation and understanding for natural biodiversity ever permeated into the social systems? And how, in my opinion, that can actually be a great example and a great way to make everybody feel part of the diversity and understand the richness and the significance that everybody can give to the functioning of social systems.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that. You know, of course I have an opinion. I'm with you 100%. And what you just said highlights how we've compartmentalized all of our systems as if the systems aren't related to one another. And because we've compartmentalized all of our systems, we don't see the connection and we don't even see the benchmark for the systems. The ecosystem is a system, but do we ever apply what it does and what it stands for to our social systems? We just keep them separated. So I think a part of the work really around intersectionality, we use that word a lot, but we don't actually talk a lot about what's the intersectionality between systems and what can we learn from one system as we try to remedy what's going on in another system. I think that is the important dialogue that in some cases we're not having. We're having deep dialogue in one compartment, but the dialogue is a lot richer when you can take it across systems, and we don't do that well. So I'm with you. Yeah. There's a hand way back here. Thank you.
First of all, thank you so much for coming today.
You're welcome.
I identify as a cisgendered bisexual Jewish woman, and I struggle with the 20% that don't care. So how do I go about my day, or anyone else who also, deals with similar situations, and approach people or who ask questions strictly for argument, who aren't at the table?
Yeah.
So how do we engage when we know they are already not there?
Yeah, I appreciate that. I probably don't have a scientific answer. I'll just give you some opinion, though. I struggle with that 20% too, because I just want everybody to get on board, because I'm getting older now and I just want it to get right before I'm dead or something, So, so I struggle with it too, but I made a decision in my life that for me to stay whole and for me to be resilient, that I could not wear myself down with continuously focusing on that 20%. What I do for that 20%, though, is I stay filled with hope. And that's good for my consciousness. What I don't do is spend all of my time trying to debate with that 20%. And my life has changed. I'm a lot happier. I can focus on people that really can advance something, and then I can still be wholly who I am. I think one of the things that happens, if I can just tell you from my own experience, when you focus on that 20% at the bottom too much, you develop a thing that's called imposter syndrome. And imposter syndrome, for those of you that don't know what that means, is that you start to feel like you actually don't belong there. And there's this little negative self-talk that sits right there on your shoulder, and every move you make, this negative self-talk says, I don't belong here, I'm not good enough, I'm not supposed to do this. That's what happens when you stay in an environment where you're working with people that are against you, your identity, what you stand for. And so it's a choice in that case about where you want to spend your time. That's why I raised it. There is a way for you to prioritize what you're going to deal with, knowing that they're going to exist. Where do you want to spend your time? I say don't spend your time there. Just
Thank you so much.
Stay filled with hope. All right, I'm off the stage. I appreciate ya. Thank you.
We're going to need some, yeah. If you met me before,